And the book itself isn't a biography about like your time or anything. It's about this 30-year history of the brigade. But interestingly enough, in 93 into 94, you were actually stationed there yourself. It's quite a unique kind of thing for an author to have.
I mean, East Tyrone Brigade had a formidable reputation among all the British Army veterans at the time, and it wasn't just when we got boots on the ground, at my time, all the way through the training, because we trained for 6 months before we go over there for a 6 month emergency tour, and at no point in that training was there ever any, hey, these are just dumb hayseeds who don't know what they're doing. You'll be fine. You're professional soldiers. They're not, etc. None of that at all. These guys know what they are doing, and they've been doing it for a long time, and they are very, very good at it. And if you're not at the top of your game, then you will make a mistake, and someone's going to get killed. If not you, even worse, it's going to be one of your blokes. And arriving, in theatre and so on, that was just reinforced. From the moment you arrive on the ground, it was, do not take this lightly. You need to kick in your training and treat it as in the highest possible terms of alertness and professionalism, or they will bite your ass. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but I interviewed an ex-SAS man who was I think he did some work in East Tyrone, and definitely did with South Armagh. And when he was posting those areas, an RUC officer who was well experienced told him, look, you have to treat these fellas as if you're dealing with like fellow professional soldiers.
Yes.
You can't think of it like you're dealing with these kind of half-trained, half-assed, kind of substandard guerrilla soldiers, you know.
Yeah, I very much so. And this is, I mean, I always put this over when I've interviewed, because when I interview the former volunteers, which is always the basis for the East Tyrone books and East Tyrone book and all the ones I'm looking to do in the future, is the volunteers themselves are always really interested to know what the British Army thought of them, what the soldiers thought. I mean, you're always wanting, and it's as I was fascinated as to what they thought of us. And of course, I was always very clear, and I am always very clear with them that the British Army took them really seriously. It didn't look at them and just say, oh God, it's amateur town, and they don't know what they're doing. Any guys express that kind of view was just kind of drummed out of town almost, because it was you're the ones that are going to get people killed. You're the idiots that aren't going to take this seriously, because it's where these people were born there, lived there all those years. We're there for a few months at a time. If you're on a residential tour, it's 2 years. But most of the time on an emergency tour, like somewhere in East Tyrone was emergency tour, so it's 6 months. That's all you're there for. And these guys will bide their time. They're in no hurry, and so on. They'll wait their opportunity, and if it comes around and you give them it, they'll take it.
You mentioned there about kind of knowing the terrain and stuff. Obviously, with guerrilla soldiers, this is one of it could even be like the key advantage that any guerrilla soldier kind of anywhere in the world has. They know the terrain like the back of their hand, and they can use it very well. The East Tyrone lads and South America as well, they would use kind of the stuff they had available to them, like tractors. There would be like mortars fired from the back of tractors.
Yeah,
Use a slurry spreader as a flamethrower.
yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And the other, I mean, you're absolutely right. Knowledge of the terrain, huge advantage. And the other big one is time, in terms of they can pick their time to do an operation, so that they're not under some sort of weird rule that says, right, this week we have to have a shoot, or we have to have a landmine, or we have to do a mortar attack, or we have to do a bomb. No, no, whatever it is, it's they're going, we will just wait and see, or we will pick our own time when everything is is in our favor. And for again, what was it, they usually go for every 10 operations they plan, 9 wouldn't happen, because they'd wait until it was perfect. If in most circumstances, they wouldn't make a mistake such as it's not looking good, we'll go ahead anyway, and then something goes wrong. If it's not looking good for whatever reason, they just say, pack up, go home, we'll wait until it's all in our favor and go again.
If someone came along, like I don't know, like someone from like a completely different country came along, when you were stationed there and asked, like, okay, characterize like some of the differences that actually make these fellas a lot more dangerous and deadly than other IRA units. What do you think you'd have told them?
I think for me, it was uh, country people are the same pretty much all over the world. Is that they're tight knit communities. You know, they live in tight family groupings, and so on, and they know them. They know their families, and they know their neighbours, and they've been there for generations. And that kind of familiarity and closeness of communities is brilliant for guerrilla operations, because it means naturally there is a layer of, they don't even mean it, but it's a layer of secrecy, that provides them with a whole axiom of security for their operations. Secondly, they're pretty hardy folk, and so on. You know, if you're working on a farm in the back end or beyond, in the middle of winter, and in the mud and the snow and so on, you don't suddenly go, do you know what? Just not fancying it at the moment. I think I'll pop home and get some Ovaltine. No, you've got to crack on. You've got to do it, and so that it breeds hardy folk who can put up with their environment, who know their environment, who know the people around them, and they're used to improvising. I mean, your comment about use what you've got, use tractors, use slurry spreaders, and so on, because piece of machinery breaks. Again, you can't just, oh, it'll cost 200 quid to take it into Dungannon and get it fixed. They're going, where are we going to get 200 quid from our farm? No, we've got to do it at home. So we've got to make something that works and that is hardy enough to carry on working on the farm. Great. So we can then turn that skill and expertise into something that's going to work against the security forces. And so that for me is the real essence of it. It's that closeness of their communities, the level of security that affords them, their ability to improvise, the hardiness of the individuals themselves. Yeah, made them a tough crew.
Yeah, on the intel gathering note, in general, I've spoken about this with other guests. It's more difficult to kind of gather intel the way security forces usually would in the countryside, because like if a car, like most of these people, in especially back then when there was like less cars, and they would know every single car
Yeah.
that was like local to the place, almost by sound. They could probably recognize one just by hearing it. So you can't have like a drive by observation or walk by like twice in the same road. It'd be way too obvious.
Oh absolutely. I mean, it's I put it in the book. I spoke to an ex 14 intelligence company officer who served out there, and they were doing a job in Kappa village, and Kappa is a world of its own, that's for sure. But like I said, they sent an operator down the high street. He did it once on a drive-by because that's what Special Branch asked him to do, and then they said, oh, we want him to go again, and they're like going, whoa, that's not a good idea. And I did it, and of course I think they got him to do it kind of 3 times, and in that time the local ASU put in operation, and the car got hit and turned into a whole shooting incident. But they did that because it was like you said, it was that car. It was just twigged. That's because locals going, what's that? That doesn't fit in. We don't know what that local, because it doesn't help that round Caput there are no road signs, because every time the highways agency and the council put them up, the locals take them all down. So good luck with finding the place and getting your way around, because there's unless you know it, and it's hardly any passing places. We're talking tiny little one track lanes and so on. Everybody knows absolutely everyone, and a stranger sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, the other thing about rural is you're afforded like a lot more space to like develop things, as in like you can store, like you can get away with storing like a lot of things in like a cattle shed or something that's not going to get checked in the same way that a city, like to move something between locations in an urban environment. There's kind of more chance to get caught. What else was I going to say? The kind of nosy neighbors thing, like if you have like a neighbor who kind of friendly with security forces, they can call up and say, oh, so and so is here, and then that can lead to arrest. But in the countryside, it just doesn't apply as much. And
No, and of course those people in the countryside would stick out because yeah. So volunteer A gets lifted and so on. He's going, who would have seen me doing that. Well, the only person who is Mrs. B from Farmhouse over there, because there is no one else who's got eyes on any of this, and she's a nosy old so and so. So it would have been her. And next thing you know, Mrs. B's getting a visit from the local boyo saying, don't ever do this again, otherwise we're going to burn you out. And you're absolutely right. It's easier to hide kit. It's easier to move kit. You could put it in a derelict on some piece of land that no one ever goes to, in an old cattle shed, and so people aren't even sure whose kind of shed that is, and whatever, it's half tumble down and etc. You're moving on the lanes, so army patrols will stick out far more readily, and there just aren't the eyes on that there are in an urban location. If you're trying to take a weapon out of a hide in the bog side or whatever and put it in a vehicle, the bog sides, like this house is absolutely all crammed up together, still are. I mean, it's very different from what it used to be back in the 60s, but 30 houses can see you all at one time. It's not the case if you're in rural Ardbow or Donnockmore in East Tyrone.
Actually, you mentioned there about the patrols, and having more space. Like the IRA, obviously they didn't always do it, but you have to be careful about civilian casualties, because you're working against your own interest. You'll lose public support. And out in the countryside, there's just so much more space, like
Yeah.
the use of roadside bombs and landmines. I know. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't really. I don't know if I could think of any in like Derry or Belfast. I'm sure they were used at some stage, but the risk of taking out like civilians as well would probably be too high. But in the countryside, if you're driving along, it's just a patrol. Like you're not going to hit innocents. Not that it never happened, to be fair, but way more rare.
Oh no, particularly, yeah, in the cities, that provisionals were very aware about the impacts of civilian casualties. So most attacks, for instance, on mobile patrols in the likes of Derry or Belfast, it's projectile weapons. So they're being aimed at a vehicle, and if something happens and what have you, that's one of those things. But they wouldn't be digging up, they wouldn't place a culvert bomb in Derry or Belfast and so on, because of the likelihood of people getting killed. I mean, they did do things like that in Derry, but it's outside the city. It usually was on the roads going towards the Donegal border. So they thought that way they'd have far fewer issues with civilian casualties, because the last thing they wanted to do was undermine their own support base. And of course that did shift the war. I mean, it shifted the war, firmly in the cities about what they could do, but also, of course, for the security forces about how they used, the SAS and other security forces, because in the early years, in the 70s, they would use them in the cities, to carry out ambushes and lethal attacks, etc. But as time went on, more and more, and this particularly affected East Tyrone Brigade, they came to the same conclusion that the provisionals did, which was, actually, you got a potential issue here of civilian casualties, which is not going to go well. So what we need to do is focus on the rural areas where we got space, and then you can let rip with an assault rifle, and your chances of hitting a passerby. I mean, unfortunately, Loch Gore proved that can still happen, and so on. So both sides were guilty of taking civilian casualties. Not that either side planned to, of course, but your chances of being more successful, if I can call it like that, in rural areas for both sides was definitely a big factor.